happy that you've been able to join me, Thabiti, because your background is so multifaceted. And I think that folks really need an opportunity to kind of hear from you. So thank you for joining me.
We made it happen. We made it happen. Of course, you've been so long, and just, I'm honored to be a part of anything that you do. You can count on me. You've just been so phenomenal for so many years. So I'm just glad to just have this conversation with you.
Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Now, listen, you are phenomenal in your own right. You're former representative of the Obama Fatherhood Initiative. You currently do work with My Brother's Keeper and the Obama Foundation. And you do a myriad of things, connecting our youth to professional sports and just giving them experiences that they wouldn't normally get. And you're still in that space. But people don't really, a lot of people, I should say, don't really know your background and kind of the experience that you bring to that conversation. So why don't you share with folks kind of how you were raised and your experiences?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a funny thing as you say that, is that because of, and you know this, because of when we've reached that success level, and like people see me around professional sports, the White House, and all the stuff that I've done publicly, they never think to say, well, wait a minute, where did all that journey come from? And most people believe that I came from a well-knit, equipped, background and family and environment, but I came from actually, not only I would consider, but somebody would consider very, very tough beginnings. So I was born and raised out of the tough streets of Brooklyn, New York, particularly Brownsville. And Brownsville is just like a whole nother world. You talk about drugs, crime, violence, peer pressure, all those kind of pitfalls, poverty, the housing developments and all that kind of stuff. So you didn't really see a lot of positive things. And so you take that environment on the outside, and then like most kids like myself on the inside, then it becomes like, well, what kind of now family do we get born into? So I was born to a 13-year-old mother who got pregnant with me, and my father was 21, 22 years old. So that whole dynamic in and of itself was very dysfunctional.
Now, did you grow up with your mom and your dad, even with the age difference?
Yeah. Let me tell you, let me just tell you who did that. My grandmother. So with her being such a Christian woman, and my father lived on one floor, his family, my mother lived on another floor, and then he just kept seeing this little cute little girl, and one thing happened. So my father knew he could have went to jail for statutory rape. So through the conversation, from the way I was told that he did not want to go to jail, he did profess that he loved my mother. My mother kind of in a weird way, I guess, felt that they could try to make this go. So my grandmother suggested that they needed to get married. But what ended up happening when they got married, my mother ended up from 13 to 16 getting married. My father's a little bit older. And what ended up happening, that my grandmother kind of thought from a Christian spiritual way that it would work out. But what actually happened, it married into a very, very violent situation where, my mom was just subjected to, constant, beatings by my father. She wasn't allowed to kind of, even though she was 16, she couldn't really be a wife and a mother. He was just very domineering. And my father was just a street guy. He was a street hood gangster. He had the perm, the processed hairdo, the gun on his hip, dice games, crap games. That was the street life that my father had. And so through all that violence and struggling, so once I got about 5, 6, 7 years old, I could still remember very clearly, just the negative experiences I saw in the house from the domestic violence and abuse.
So you remember a lot of that. So even 0, 3, 4, 5.
Some stuff really, really still stand out. For an example, my father was so crazy in his own way. He used to put my mother's beatings on a schedule.
Like, wait, you were just perceiving that it was a schedule, or he actually had a schedule?
It was a schedule. And see, my uncle was a pimp too. So I came from an environment where controlling women, and they better do this and they better do that, and you have to order them a certain way. And if they don't follow through with that, then there's always consequences. So I used to hear my father say, by the time I get home, this better occur. If it doesn't, then you're going to answer to me. And a lot of my uncles that way. A lot of the men that I saw in the neighborhood, they were the same way treating the women like that. So I knew by a certain time at night, you start hearing the bam, 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 the beatings. because of the schedule. And then the next morning, you knew what was going to happen because now you saw the bruises and all the marks and all the stuff that my mom went through. And so, so I remember two incidents. One, I remember very clearly when I was 8 years old, where on Christmas Day, my father just was in another zone in terms of his behavior again. And he lifted my mother up and body slammed her on the project floor. And everybody knows who live in the projects, you got that hard floor.
Concrete, yeah.
And he made her head open. And I was almost out of the socket. So Christmas for me never really meant the same since then because of that beating. So I'm spending Christmas Day at a hospital. And luckily my aunt was there, my mother's older sister, to kind of say, hey, you're going to kill her. So, that was one major incident. And then of course, the other one, when I was 12, my mother went to the top of the project roof where we lived, 7 stories up. Mm-hmm. She decided she didn't want to live anymore, go through all that stuff she was going through. So she jumped off the roof and she landed and luckily she lived. So, which is crazy, she lived. So I was playing basketball. One of the friends came and said, yo, your mother's at the top of the roof. I said, wait a minute, you must be telling a joke. But some say, drop the basketball. So I dropped the basketball and then I run a block and a half from the park, the playground, to around the building. As I turn the building, who's leaping off is my mother.
So you actually saw it happen.
Yeah. So she's not that big. So when she jumped, she came, with her legs. So when she landed on that hard grass, you got the hard grass sidewalk in the street. So she landed on the hard grass. So it's almost like a pretzel when it collapsed. Mm-hmm. So she collapsed. So her legs just kind of went up into her chest and just, everything broke. So the blood and everything. And so when you're dealing with that kind of trauma experiences in the home, in the neighborhood, every other day, did you hear about our best friend just got killed? Do you hear about so-and-so on the 5th floor just got killed? So all that trauma, and you're talking about, and I know for me, I'm speaking for me, I wanted to go back to my schools and around my basketball coaches and express how I was feeling. Mm-hmm. But again, growing up in the hood, we're taught dust it off.
Right. So speaking of that though, Thabiti, I know it's 2022 and people think of things totally different, but did you ever get or receive formal counseling or have even a neighbor or someone that you talk to on a regular basis about everything that you saw?
Not formally, no, not formally, but through the basketball coaches. I was always a good student. I was a good student in school. So everybody knew when my mother jumped off the roof, everybody knew the schools, the neighborhood, was in the media, in the newspapers and the news. Right. So a lot of teachers did take interest in me. And through that, I was allowed to kind of just share a little bit around some stuff that's going on. Because here's the problem was, so when my mother came out of the hospital home, she said, you better not tell our business and you better not talk about it. So I couldn't just go and openly share and say, Mom, can we deal with counseling? Let's talk about this.
And that's a lot in our culture. That's a lot in our culture. In fact, when I started this podcast and I had shared with some people that part of the reason I did it was for the purpose of transparency, because it's free and you can't receive help or support if you don't open up. But I think a lot of this is cultural, where you're told, don't put my business in the street, unless somebody's paying your bills, that kind of thing, like, they don't need to know anything, so you figure it out on your own. But in your case, I'm trying to figure out, you hear things all the time with people who grow up in traumatic situations, and maybe you have multiple kids and one child goes this way and does the same thing, and the other one takes a totally different path. What do you think it was for you that allowed you to take all of those really, really traumatic experiences and make you into the man that you are to be able to convert that and give back?
Yeah, tremendous question. My answer is simple. 2 things. One, I was a gifted basketball player. So basketball became a different thing for me. So it wasn't just recreational, but basketball became something as almost like my therapy. So every time I did well and did good, I got the endorsements and the accolades, from the community and everybody around me. So that kind of balanced the trauma and all the stuff the painful things, but all the good news, the trophies and, the pats on the back and people showing interest, it kind of gave that balance. But also I do remember, my coaches and certain best friends and certain teachers that I still would, confide in and talk about, what was bothering me, what was troubling me around those experiences. And so I kind of looked at the environment and I said, it's got to be something better than this.
So
And I
that
knew
was your motivation.
So
that was your motivation. In some respects, it was probably a good distraction, right? So that you can kind of rejigger and rebalance yourself. Do you feel like you ever fully process, because you mentioned a few different things, right? And you just thankfully shared a couple of incidents that were top of mind, but do you feel like you ever fully processed those? And if you did, what age were you when you did it?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, and I did talk with a few psychologists along the way, and for me, processing it is in like several phases. Like there was a time where what I just shared, I couldn't do it without getting emotional and crying. Because that meant that I'm still dealing with some things, but I've learned how to put it in perspective. And one, I was carrying too much weight and pain by my parents, things I couldn't control. I didn't cause that, but I was carrying so much of that when I needed to separate myself from that and put it in perspective.
Can we pause there?
Because
I think so many men are going to relate to hearing you say that. Just the fact that you recognize that the weight that you were carrying, and you said I was carrying too much of the weight of my parents, the burdens of your parents with you. And I think just recognizing what's yours to own and like sift through versus what you're carrying is like so key. Was that kind of part of your
that's the key. And I think that's why when people meet me and see me and they're like, wow, your spirit is so different. You have a certain energy about you that nobody would suspect that you've been through. Because I knew how to say, you know what? I can't own all of that. But most of us, especially in the Black community, we own so much and we carry so much of that weight to the next experience, the next experience, the next. And then what happens is when experiences become so negative and compounding with each other, now we become slaves and held hostage around those emotions. And we never gets released from it. And so we never can see that door open to the possibilities of the fact that it takes a lot of strength to overcome those things and to drive us towards so things that, society and life is waiting for us around successful things. But I think for me, if I wanted to be a successful student, basketball player, and fulfill all these different dreams, I couldn't carry that kind of luggage with me. And so I got about 15, 16 when I knew certain things were just really, really looking promising for me. That's when I really consciously would separate it. And even though my mother and father would still push things on me, I would push back on it.
So how did that impact you? How did that impact you as a parent? Because you're also a dad. And so you talked about carrying the weight of your parents. It doesn't go away. None of our traumas go away. We just figure out ways to understand it, process it, and move on. So give me an example where maybe some of your past trauma popped up when you had to like play dad yourself. How did that look?
Well, when I became a teenage dad with Kim, trying to figure out how am I going to go to college, how am I going to do certain things, so that anxiety did creep into me. And it started compounding with, I deserve this, I caused this, all this happened when I was born, this happened next, so now I done got somebody pregnant, now I'm a father, so all this stuff didn't happen. But I had to kind of say, no. I have to break this cycle. I got to hold strong to what is my game plan and how am I going to get through, because the thing that stood out to me, Jack, is that I did not want to bring another generation into this trauma. So Kim deserved to have the best freedom of an emotional dad that would be in her best interest to get the best of me as a father. When I wanted to go to school, I didn't want to bring all that stuff with me as a basketball player, a student, trying to get my degree, and also being a parent with my daughter on campus. So I had to kind of really separate that and process that and keep that in tight. And whenever I would feel those moments, I knew when it would trigger, and I knew how to now separate myself and get into my own little space to sort that out.
So do you feel like you had permission or what? I'm sorry, continue.
I like that word, permission.
Because you were a teenage dad. So this isn't the Thabiti that we're looking at now. That's like, listen, this is the way it is. You're a teenage dad. You're still carrying all that burden. And you said, okay, I had to figure out how to catch myself, my triggers, and recenter. That took the emotional maturity of like a 80-year-old to do that in my vantage point. But do you feel like you had permission to be vulnerable while you were doing that?
I had to give myself the permission. And I think for all of us, and I say it because sometimes I was caught up into that, and I meet a lot of the fathers and a lot of the men and the boys, even at 8, 9, 10 years old, 15 years old. What we do, we're not giving ourselves permission, and what we have done, rightfully so. I spent so many years trying to get the permission from my mother, which I felt she should be the one to explain it to me. What happened? Why this and why that? I should have the same thing from my father. Why are you doing this? Why is that happening? They would never give me any answers. By that, they would not give me the permission. So I had to own and take that permission for myself and say, you know what? I'm going to give myself permission to say, this is how I'm going to feel about this. This is how I'm going to process this. And this is how I'm going to really put myself in position to take my bad experiences, turn it into positive, and accept the fact that I did go through these things. But what is my takeaways from that? That allows me to be the permission to be vulnerable, to cry, to express myself, to feel. Even if it means feeling like the worst of me is the worst. And it's okay. It's okay to break down. It's okay to feel like I'm having a bad day. And once I started showing others that, more support came. And that opened up more freedom for me to now express and, build on that. Yeah. And it actually gave me the permission to say, you know what? In spite of that, the world still deserves to give me what I've earned and what I deserve to have.
And you deserve it. So you told yourself, you deserve it.
Yeah, I still tell myself to this day, every now and then I got to look in that mirror and say, you know what? You deserve this for you. Give yourself permission, because sometimes subconsciously we're waiting for that validation from the world and others. And when we don't get it, at the end of the day, God's saying, well, wait a minute. This is between you and I. It starts with you. So I've learned the habit of giving yourself permission. I taught my daughter that. I taught fathers that, and I share it as a public speaker and a figure. Give yourself permission and give yourself the right to feel whatever you feel. And at the end of the day, once you own that and give yourself the permission, now you have the permission to also take those feelings and just run with it and just live yourself, be the best you, and just make it happen. And again, from what I've seen, all the spiritual energy is going to come into your life and just make good things happen. And I think if I never gave myself the permission, the things I'm doing now, what God had me in place to do, to turn around, to give back and help others, would have never occurred. So I think you're going to add
pastor. I think you're adding Pastor Boone to your titles and to your list of things, because I'm hearing a word today. So I asked
myself,
you did?
Why did I watch my mom at 12? But I didn't realize till later, I got that experience because I'm going to be the best spokesperson and poster boy to share to others. How do you get through it? Because I went through something that most people would not get through.
So it's interesting you say that, because when I see, my son sometimes has struggles, and I say to him, this is your testimony. So instead of miring yourself in why me? Why me? Why did this happen to me? Why did it have to be me? Why not you? And what I hear you saying is the same thing that I tell him, which is, this is your testimony. So where you are right now, begin to vision and see yourself outside of the situation, and take note of each step and the whole journey, because you're going to have to share that with somebody else. And that's why God, and you're the best person to do that. And that's why God has you going through this and not somebody else. So I love to hear you say that, because you're on the other side to reinforce that.
Yes, we have to give ourselves permission. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to cry. It's okay to just, like I said, just break it down. And I see a lot more men doing that and incorporating that. And I've also seen a lot of them respond back to me, say, you know what? I'm glad I was able to do that. Because a part of our manhood is the vulnerability that we're not really being taught. Part of our manhood is that, we need to give ourselves permission. We need to know that there's another emotional side that's not always just wrapped around this false bravado and, insecurity about how we
Really,
must
that's a
be,
word.
you
That is
know.
a word. So, it's so important because I think the perception is that crying, emoting is the opposite of being a man. And what I hear you saying is no, vulnerability is what being a man is about. It's a part of manhood, just like lifting bricks, right? I mean, the physical side of it, right?
To the world that really understands that, whether it's women, other people, males, vulnerability is very attractive. It's a very attractive character trait that really gets into the core of part of the essence of who we are. Without that piece, we only giving parts of ourselves that's real, but then there's another parts of ourselves that's not real. And we keep having this imposter syndrome about ourselves that's not giving the fullness of ourselves. Because again, there were times where I would go home like, wait a minute, I'm now seeing another side of me that the world don't see, but I'm seeing it at home with all the boo-hooing and crying and all the stuff I'm going through. But the world needs to see that because at the end of the day, that's me too.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
that's
also
them
helpful
and
to other
him
people
and
as
him.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
Yes.
great. So I ask everyone who's on the show, what's your juggle? And it could be anything. It could be what you're juggling emotionally, what you're juggling work-wise, wherever you want to take it. So what is your juggle, Thabiti Boone?
My juggle, and I tell you, it's a juggle that I fight with. My juggle is still to be in a position to be helpful with all the different 4, 5, 6 lanes. How can I juggle all the things that I'm around that will turn that back into helping others? How can I juggle that? The other thing that I juggle is to make sure that my daughter, my family, my mother who's still alive, my father's still alive, how can I still juggle to know that I'm still connected to a family with all the stuff we done been through, all the craziness, they still family. And how can I emotionally juggle the past with them and still know that they my parents and still juggle the fact that they're still parents that I deserve and that I'm enjoying now. But that's my juggle, juggling all these different lanes and emotions and things like that. But the end of the day is I want to juggle and just give the best of myself to everybody I'm in contact with, especially fathers, Black men and boys who don't get enough attention around this subject and conversation and the kind of trauma and things that we go through around our mental health. And so I just want to be in that space and juggling that to the best of my ability.
Well, I can tell you that my experience with you, knowing you all these years, way back from the Rainbow Push Coalition events and things like that, is that I see the Christ in you. That anytime I've seen someone ask of you, you have given. Anytime I've asked of your time, of your counsel, just a conversation, you've always been there. So you are definitely, from my vantage point, living your goals. So I appreciate you.
Nothing but love for you.
Mhm.
And
Thanks for
one thing I
joining.
will close out by saying, when we part of our vulnerability is our give back. And when we do that, that's part of our healing process. And I had to learn that. So when I give, you feel the healing inside yourself, and there's no room for the trauma when you're giving back.
That's a word. Appreciate your time.